Hey everyone, welcome back to BlenderDiplom.com. Once again, Gottfried Karl Heinrich Hofmann speaking. And today I'm going to show you how I created this backlit type God-rate logo effect I've posted a few days earlier. Well, it's actually pretty simple. Here is my logo and split into two parts, right about centered, and got two different materials applied. The materials ain't shadeless. So later on you can see a little bit of the effect from the God rays interacting with the logo, but in the world I've got a simple environment lighting, so it looks kind of shadeless or flat, even though it isn't. Then you might wonder, where are the God rays coming from? Well, that's pretty simple. It's a spot lamp with halo enabled shining through. And the settings are, well, the placement is kind of important, but I'm gonna show you later on. And if you had your own try on the riddle, I am sure you found out that the problem is not the halo light, because everybody probably just added a halo and it's looking cool, but how to do the texture wipe or fade in the texture, because this is a cool look from the halo, but how can you get the logo to fade in? Well, what I did was I created a rig with an empty that's controlling both the position of the halo spot and a texture on the material that's controlling the transparency. And thanks to the rig, everything is easily animatable and you're on total control. And of course I also added a little bit of compositing. That's really not much, actually it's just a glare node, but I'm using a driver. So let's check the driver, and the driver is controlling the position of the glare effect. Once again, it's driven by the empty, so the empty is controlling everything. You got a perfect rig for a very simple control of this great looking effect. So now let's go for the tutorial. So let's just go and do things fast. I'm deleting the light and the cube, X delete, and then I'm selecting the camera, hit Alt-G, Alt-R to clear location and rotation, and G set upwards a little bit, hit 0 on the numpad to go to camera view, hit G, middle mouse button, and then I'm dragging it until it's somewhat filling a certain number of these squares here, which each is a blender unit, and this is 5 blender units to the left and the right, so 10 blender units in total. That's pretty good. Let's hit Shift A, add a text, and here we got the problem that the text only by default has the Blender font as an option, but we can select TrueType fonts from our hard disk, and I'm usually choosing this one for my logo. Then go tab edit mode, and let's write to Blender GX, point it up there, and then I'm doing a little bit of extra on this. Let's do some extrusion up until you see it in from the camera, but just a little bit. 0.05 might be a good value. Oh no, that's too much. 0.02, and some bevel, which will just round off the shape, and 0.05 with a resolution of 3 might be perfect. Then I'm hitting Shift A, add another text, and usual thing, selecting the font, going to edit mode, typing whatever I want to type, and of course the value should be exactly the same, so that's here bevel of 3, and the depth I guess was 0.005. And now let's add two different materials, and let's call this text object blender, and this here diplom. Now let's give the blender a material named blender, and I'm just choosing a more or less random red. And for the diplom, I'm keeping the default material. Let's see how it looks. We got no light in the scene, so let's make the background black and turn on environment lighting with a strength of 0.5. That should be enough to get some very basic looking lighting. And now, and this is actually not really looking like 3D text. It's looking like directly printed, like maybe in Photoshop or your favorite processing application like OpenOffice or something like that. But it's 3D, and that will be very important when we later get the light being blocked by the text. So let's select both of them and put them somewhere right in the middle of the scene, but a little upwards, so not directly into the middle. So it got a small variety. This just is a little bit more pleasant for the eye. And yeah, this should be about the middle. So next thing is, let's add the light that will make the God rays shine through. And that's simply a lamp, and there's the spot lamp. And if you check it now, it's shining downwards, but it should go upwards. So let's hit R, X 180. Now it's pointing upwards. And as you see, let's go to 5, numpad 5, which means that our view is now in orthographic mode. Let's hit G, set, and move it down a little bit. And let's check the settings. The energy of 1 is okay. The distance should not be so near to so much over the camera, but more like the cone should stop right here. But we're gonna set this in a few seconds. First thing, I want to increase the spot shape to at least 90 degrees for a cooler effect later on. Then I want to turn on show cone, so we see which parts will have this ray effect, and I want to turn on halo. And then let's just see how this is looking when we're hitting render, and we see just white and no real God rays, no blocking. And that's because we did not set a step size of bigger than 0. 0 means no blocking, and this is weird. 1 means top quality, so by a step size of 1 we'll get the best quality available in Blender, and that's of course, so let's keep it set at 1, because if we'd increase this, we'd only get a better, not so good quality. And also the blend shapes should be a 0.5 to get it nice and smooth. But next thing I want to do is I want to get the spot shape nearer towards the characters. And be aware that if the characters are before this small dotted line here, like just for a simple test, it won't block the light anymore. See, just the red part is blocking the light, the white one nicht, because it's placed below this small dotted line. So let's go there and get the line as near to the fonts as possible for a stronger effect. And then let's go back, hit back to 0, and we see that the spotlight is actually going right about, it's covering the entire font, so that's good. But I'm gonna move it upwards a little bit, so it's more on par with the fonts now. Yeah, a lot better. Now the next thing I'm gonna do with the spot shape is, let's do first another test render. And we might find some very fine lines there, like here and over there, that are not so cool when you see the final product. So let's hit back to the spot lamp and increase the sample size. and the number of samples to get rid of this blur problem. And maybe 1024 is already enough. Yeah, okay, no, not really. Be careful with this setting because it increases render time, but of course also quality. And now I see things are looking pretty good. And the next thing I want to do is increase the intensity of the halo. So let's check if we see a difference here in 1 and here in 2. Not really yet, so let's maybe increase it up to 2. Yeah, now this is a halo, right? And another thing I want to do is G, X, and move it a little bit more to the right and check whether it's covering the entire scene when it's at the last font. And in this case it might look cool if it decrease the distance of the spot, so we get a nicer effect, just so much that it's right above the camera. And now we got a better effect with nice fade out. I guess we can still go down. And the more we reduce this, the more the final thing is concentrated, but we can start to see the fall off. And I see, well, let's do it to an exact sense of 10, and that should be cool. Yeah. Now of course this in the middle is a little bit extreme, so let's reduce the halo intensity once again to maybe 1.2. What I'm doing here is I'm hitting F11 to get the last render pack, and then I'm hitting J to switch render slots, and I see that's not enough, so let's go to slot 5, and I guess an intensity of 1.5 should be best. And that's for the halo. If you actually had a try on this, you might have found out that the halo is not the big problem, but the real problem is how to fade in the text, and this is going to be the next step, so stay tuned. Well, now that we got our God rays in place, let's try to fade out the fonts in a very smooth fashion, and for this I'm doing a little, but very little preparation. Let's hit Shift A and add an empty, and I'm calling this empty.controller because it will control right about everything. And the first thing it's going to control is the position of our spot lamp. So let's select the spot lamp and add a constraint, copy location of the empty.controller, but not the C, just the X and the Y. And now if we move the empty.controller, the spotlight will follow suit. So let's move this right a bit over to the diplom. And on the diplom I'm gonna add a texture, but before I'm gonna add the texture, let's turn on transparency and choose C transparency on the material. The alpha should be down to 0 and thus making it transparent. And maybe also turn off the specular. But no, keep it on. It's a cool effect. It will be a cool effect. Then here the texture. Let's add a new one and a simple blend one. And let's make it influence the alpha, not the color. Now let's see how this is looking. And of course the sides should be flipped, so let's choose ramp and flip it. And I'm also making it a little smoother looking by choosing ease. And now, yeah, the left side is out of focus. Now the left side has solid color while the right side is transparent. And now the very cool thing is, let's choose the coordinate object, and let's choose the empty dot controller as the coordinates for the texture. And now, if we render again, things are fading out nicely, and we can actually move our empty controller. And let's, for example, move it around there, and now the diplom is nearly completely faded in. Or let's move it right to the left where the blender is, and the diplom should not be visible now. Pretty cool, right? Oh, and by the way, the transparency, the C transparency does not affect the blocking of the rays. So if I remove the texture here, the diplom will be completely invisible, but it will still block the rays. So be aware of that. And the reason why this is no problem for us is because we put the spot shape, the spotlight, so near to the fonts that it's just not illuminating the other parts. Those are out of the illumination, so you can't see them. Pretty simple trick, and it really solves a problem, because otherwise you might need another mask object, like another empty or something, or a cube to mask things out. And this way, by just placing the spot shape correctly, we get rid of many problems. So I'm turning this back on, and let's just use the same texture on the blender, and make sure on the red material to also turn on transparency, and put the alpha down to 0. And now things should also work on the blender, and not really yet. And that's because we still have to set the influence. Even though we're using the same texture, the mapping and the influence need to be set separately. So now everything is perfect. Yeah. Pretty cool, right? Now let's go for the next step, and that's gonna be some simple and very basic compositing. Oh, and if you think that it's fading in too slow, because maybe you don't want that, here is already a few. You can see the R on the blender. Let's select the text that is the blender and decrease the ramp here a little bit. And now, yeah, problem is solved. Perfect. So next step, compositor. So let's head over to the compositor, turn on use nodes and backdrop, and I'm also adding a viewer node. Hit Control Shift left click to connect it to the render layer, and then I'm gonna add a filter glare, and here I'm gonna use the following thing, that's ghosts, and that's basically a simple lens flare effect, and quality can probably be low for faster rendering. Iterations, let's use 4 or 5, and the more iterations the stronger the effect, but also the threshold will make the effect stronger. And here we can start to see it. Let's see how it's looking if we're moving the empty a little. Ah, nothing has changed. We need to re-render, or we can turn on auto render, and now whenever we are changing something in the 3D viewport, the compositor will automatically re-render and update. And here in the middle, the glare will create some very bright spot. And all in all, the effect is a so-called mix that's possible inside of the glare node, but I want to add it, which of course is totally not realistic, but we are not going for realism, we are going for a cool look. So let's add a an output a color mix and change the output of the glare node to rendered image only, and that's what you can set in mix. If you set it to -1, we got original image, or with 1, we got just the output of the glare node. And so let's mix it up here. Let's add the glare node to the render layer. Of course, currently we got the same output as from the glare node, but if we change add, things are looking a little different, and I think also a little cooler. But I want to check how things are looking in the middle of the scene, where the spot will be the brightest. And yeah, I guess stronger values are too extreme, so let's reduce this to maybe 0.2 or 0.3. I guess 0.3 will still look a little cooler, especially in the parts a little more outside. But there's still something I'd like to change, and if you look at the output of the glare node, you see that its center is the center of the image. And unfortunately there is no way to change it directly from the glare node, because I'd really like to have it, medium is a little better. High is a little too strong. I want it to change with the position of the halo, so the center should always be where the halo is. And to do this, you can of course simply use a translate node, so select distort and then translate. And then let's see what's happening if we maybe translate it 300 pixels to the left. And of course the image just wasn't big enough, and there's now a dark spot at the right part where we don't see any glare effect anymore. And that's because the glare effect is of course working on the original render layer, which has a set render size. Let's set it to 720p, do some re-rendering. Also in the compositor, things should update to 720p now. Yeah, which of course makes the glare effect a little stronger. And we got the problem of this dark part at the right one. And we can easily fix this by simply blowing up the output of the glare node. So let's select distort, scale. And we got it here set to relative. But how much do we need to scale it? Well, that's really easy. We got two parts here, the left part and the right part in our scene, separated by this green line. And let's see what's happening. If we move the empty to the far left, the part here, it's now at the green line, was at this part before, so we still got half of our image there. And that's the same in the other direction. We also got half of the image to the other direction, still there. If we move this, so what we need is just another half of on the image. So let's scale it by 1.5, and we should be perfectly safe. Let's also scale it by 1.5 on the y-axis. And now let's see how this is looking. First here the scaled version, and then the translated version. And it's still not right. What's happening? What's on? Let's re-render. That's weird, because the scaled up version should be quite a bit bigger. So we get this one. Here. The scale node outputs, of course, a bigger version. And now we got here the translate node. So, of course, on the right part is cut off. But if we feed the output of the translate node into the add node, things will be cut down to the right position. So, perfect. And the next thing we'd like to do is we'd like, of course, to animate the translation. And we can do this very easily. We only need to animate this on the x-axis. And I want the position on the x-axis of the controller empty to control the position, the translation of the scaled up glare effect. And that's handled in Blender by so-called drivers. Right click and select Add Single Driver. And those drivers are very much similar to the expressions in After Effects. It's just that in After Effects expressions are written in in JavaScript, while in Blender the drivers are written in Python. And you can find them in the graph editor. And there, don't select F-curve editor but drivers. And here we got the driver. Let's select it and turn on the properties. And now here we got the driver. Here is the current position, so if we, the current value, which is -300, but we can replace the value by anything we want, and we want to replace it by the position of the empty. So let's check here, we got a variable. We can use this to get the position of the empty. So we got it also set to transform, x location, perfect. Just select the empty and copy this variable up there. And now it's updating with the position of the empty. But of course, this 1.2 is not so cool, because the translate node works with pixels, but the empty is currently moving in Blender units. But we can fix this by taking a look at our scene. The empty is moving in Blender units, and our camera is currently spanning 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Blender units to the right and 5 to the left. That's 10 incomplete. All in all, that's 10 Blender units. And if we move this to the left, wouldn't it be cool if we wouldn't have a value of round about 5, but more or less 1? Well, that's pretty simple. Let's just divide the variable by 5. Blender can do this automatically by entering the expression, just like you did in school with your small Taschenrechner in Germany. It's with your calculator. And now we got 0 in the middle and 1 on the left, -1 on the left, +1 on the right. And wouldn't it be really cool if this was entered directly in pixels? But well, that's no problem. Our entire scene is 1280 pixels wide, so it's 640 pixels to the left and plus 640 pixels to the right. So let's just multiply this with 640 pixels, and now we got the perfect position. So let's do a little test. Let's move the empty right here where the blender is. Make this a little smaller, and let's see how this is looking here. You can easily find out about the position of the glare by switching from add to mix and reducing the FAC value. So, or turning it up, and it will change from the original image to the one down there. And you see, perfect, it's perfect roundabout matching the position of the spot. So let's go back to add, and now we got our animation all set, thanks to the power of drivers. And drivers are very powerful, especially in motion graphics or when doing animation in general. So pretty cool thing, right? Next, let's just do a very simple animation. And since we've set up this pretty cool rig, which is automatically updating the position of the texture that's blending, of the spot lamp, and of the position of the glare, we only need to animate this one empty, and we got the perfect fade-in animation. So stay tuned. So let's save, and here I am back in the default view of Blender, and now let's animate the empty. First let's move it just out of the side of the Blender, so the spot shape is not touching any bit of the Blender anymore. So right about here, hit I and insert a location keyframe, and then I'm going to frame number 200. Move this on the x-axis up there so it's right about outside, and insert another keyframe for the location. Now if I play this, we got a very smooth beginning, it's faster in the middle and smoothed out animation at the end. That's pretty much perfect, and the only thing that's still left to animate is the intensity of the spot shape, because at the beginning, of course, the intensity should be at 0, so let's hit 0 and insert a keyframe, and then let's move the controller empty, or just let's start the animation and see when it's right about there and the B is completely lit. Maybe it's even a little bit further here. So yeah, when the B is completely lit, I also want it to be at the default energy of 1. So let's set it to 1 and hit I again. Then I'm just running the animation, waiting till it's right about where it's going away from the M. Hit I again to insert another keyframe, and then I'm going to frame 200 and set the energy to 0, hit I, and our stuff is ready to render. So I'm going to render it to a PNG image sequence with 100% compression. And of course, small tip, always if you got an animation, always first render it out in a lossless image sequence, and then later on use the reduce sequence editor inside Blender to create maybe AVI, MKV, MOV or MP4, any video file from it, because this way you don't run into that much trouble when rendering. So let's call it BlenderDiplom.tutorial.backlit, and of course let's add a slash. Now we got a folder, and once again BlenderDiplom.tutorial.backlit. This is the file name now, and this will be the image sequence, and now I'm just need to hit render of the animation, and it will start rendering, and it's also rendering pretty fast. Well, that's about it. This is the final animation. Yeah, you don't see much anyway, but I was pretty much surprised by something completely different than this, and that's the little contest I had put up for this tutorial. Because if you want to learn something, the very best way to learn something is to do it yourself and to find it out for yourself. This way you get the highest return when you're learning. Because if you watch something else over the shoulder, like in a video tutorial, you might get some stuff, but you'll forget most of it. If you actually do the tutorial, you'll get more, but you'll get the most if you just take a look at the effect and think for yourself, how could it have been produced, and try to recreate it yourself. So I started this little contest for this effect, because I thought it's very well aligned, and I was totally overwhelmed by the responses I got. This was so crazy. It was so many different people created very different solutions, and actually I learned a lot from all your submissions, because it was you all had so good ideas and so creative approaches to this aspect, to this technique, that it was just wow. And that's why I will be creating a second video that will show the best entries, the best submissions, and you will learn a lot more from those, I guess, than from this tutorial. So let's go and see what the others have done. And of course, happy blending. Well, just 2 or 3 more little things. First of all, you shouldn't forget to put the final composite also in the output composite, because otherwise you won't see the composite effect, the glare effect in the final render. Then second, here you can see the reason why I have chosen a very dark or a pitch black background for this effect, and that's because the halo of the spotlight, when you turn down the intensity of the spotlight, the halo doesn't vanish. It actually just gets darker and darker, and in the end it is black, which of course looks a little weird in scenes where you get a colorful background. So here is the black spot, that's the halo. A little stupid, but that's the way Blender works. Also, you might run into a certain kind of trouble, and that is those banding effects you see here, and which are especially very extreme when you're uploading it on YouTube or somewhere else where you got a very hefty compression. And to counter this, you can turn on dither in the post-processing setting. That's usually a more or less hidden tab, but when you open it up, here you see the dither value. And now let's see how things are looking after dithering, and they, yeah, ultra smooth.